Okay, so we continue with Vue.js, and I want to give you a description of what the homework is, and then maybe we'll continue with trying to build an app that acts like the newsreader, based simply on Vue.js. Sorry, just one second. Hey, if you can find me a glass of water, a moment. Sorry, thank you. So the homework is as follows. I ask you to implement a game that is the game of 15. So there is this 15 puzzle, okay, and that works in this way. I'm sure that you have played it with a real thing, right? So there is a 4x4 chessboard with one empty square, and when you click on and you can shift any piece into the empty slot, and so move the pieces one by one, right? And the goal is that, at the beginning the playboard is scrambled, and at the end you have to make it all ordered 1 through 15 with the empty square on the bottom right. Okay? So the homework goes through stages. The first homework is simply you are presented with a board in order, okay? And you can simply play like this game, but you cannot really scramble it in an interesting way, okay? So you just play it, and then you can say solve that basically throws you back into the initial position, okay? Then there is a more advanced homework point in which you have to actually scramble. I don't know if these people have implemented the scramble function correctly. Now, I gave you pointers. The point about scrambling is that not every random permutation of the tiles is reachable from the initial position, okay? There is a notion of parity. I don't know if you know this already in this game, but there is a notion of parity, okay? So you can compute the parity of a board position. And whenever you make a move, you move between two board positions that have the same parity, okay? So from the initial position, you can only reach half of the game of the possible board configurations. Okay, so if you compute a random scramble by just computing a random permutation of the array, you have only one probability out of 2 that the configuration you obtain via random scramble can be reduced to the initial position by solving the game. Okay, so you need to implement essentially a test for solvability. No? So you do a random, there are many ways of doing it, but a simple way would be you compute many random permutations. So for each random permutation, you compute its parity. If the parity coincides with the parity of the initial configuration, then you know that that's a solvable configuration, and then you leave it on the screen. Otherwise, you compute another one, okay? So that's how the game has to look like, okay? And I give you various pieces, but not all the pieces. So let's see how to build a 15 puzzle in Vue.js. So this is how it looks, okay? I didn't make it look square, but I'm sure you can. You can put some effort and make this look better. But I don't care so much for the homework that it looks square. After all, these pieces slide really well even if they're just rectangular. So that's fine. So let me just close some of the old code windows here so that we see the last one a little bit better. So how do I obtain these, and how do I assign behavior to something like this? Okay, so these are the questions. The Vue.js starter code that I give you is here. Let me change the font size again. So there is an HTML portion, index.html, and then there is the JavaScript version. Both of them are built on top of the starter app that I gave you last time, okay? I just replaced the content of the two. And if you look at this is the branch homework 5 of Cordova starter app. And if you look at what I did, you can see that the changes are pretty minimal, really. But they are very interesting in the sense that they teach us some simple techniques with the Vue.js, and so that's essentially why I chose the homework, and I want to talk about it. So last time we saw how to use Vue.js to loop over a list of newspaper articles, right? It was a list essentially of objects. In this case, the list can be also explicitly given in the code. Right, so that's what I'm doing. I'm building a table because in HTML, tables are not really encouraged unless you want something really to look like a grid. But in this case, we do want the board to look like a grid. So we might as well use a table, right? So I built a table, and I have two nested loops over indices I and j. TR is table row, and the TD is table data, or table cell. I don't know why they call it TD rather than TC, but whatever, no? So these is the loop essentially that produces the table, okay? And then we look later at this element, at this stuff that I wrote here, okay? But in fact, I think I can even break the lines in a way to make it more understandable. So this is the filling of each cell. Okay? So this is a mix of HTML, of text actually, of content, and of the special escape characters, the delimiters of Vue, in order to include values of Vue variables inside here. Okay? So essentially I'm outputting open parentheses, value of I, value comma, value of j, close parenthesis, colon, and then I'm outputting the content of the board array in the position 4 times I plus j. So, it's your choice. You can either have a bidimensional array, but in this case I was lazy and I just use a unidimensional array, and then I index it by multiplying the first index times 4 plus the second index. It's kind of the same, obviously, right? So there is no difference there. So I'm essentially outputting the coordinates of the cell, and then I'm outputting the value of this array board for those values, okay? So if you look at what I do, the output is this. You see, 0, 0 contains 1, 0, 1 contains 2, and so on and so forth. Till the last one that contains 0. You wonder why this craziness? Well, because I decided it. I decided, and again, you can do what you want. It's not really that you have to follow what I do. But I decided that I will have a variable, so a data element that is known by Vue, that is called board, okay, that I initialize to the empty list, okay, and then I have a reset method. Instead of calling it, play again, etc., I called it reset, why not? And in the reset method, I assign to this self Vue board element a list that goes from 1 to 15 and then 0. So that for me 0 means the empty cell. Okay? And so I get it displayed in this way. Okay? So far so good, right? Nothing very surprising. Then there are a couple of things that you can find in the Vue documentation. That is, how do I color these squares? This is not how I ask you to color them in the homework. In the homework, I think I might have it here. I ask you to color it as in Wikipedia. Like that. With alternate black and white and red. So you have to do a little bit of work, to do it in the right way. But here at least I used, white and red, even though in the wrong way. But so how do you color things? So in general, in HTML, the way you color stuff or give, special aspects to stuff is not that you sort of, do some paint statements or anything like that. What you do is that you change the classes that are associated with some HTML elements. And then the CSS, either written by you or the default one you are using, will translate that change of class into a change of outward aspect. Okay? So what I'm doing here in particular is this. Stupid.css defines the classes that are tied to the basic colors. There is a class white, red, green, blue, black, whatever, no? And so what I'm doing here is I'm simply associating a class red to some of those TD elements in the table and class black to the last one, okay? And I do it as follows. Actually, rather than doing it, let me show you where the documentation is. So if you don't know how to do these things, because I also don't know and I have to look it up from time to time, you say vue.js, you land on the page of Vue, okay, and at this point you say, I don't know, guide. That seems like a good start. And then there is class and style bindings. So if we want to modify the class of an element, how do we do it? You read the instructions, okay, and you find pretty much what I'm doing. Okay, so a way to do it in simple is this. Active is the class that I'm associating, and isActive is a Boolean JavaScript variable or condition. Okay, so you're essentially giving a sort of dictionary. It looks like a Python dictionary, but you essentially say class colon condition when the class should be associated. Okay, and here you see another example: class colon condition when the class is associated, class colon condition when the class should be associated, right? So in my code, I follow exactly the same pattern, and I do this. I say vbind class is equal to red if 4 times I plus j is smaller than 8. No, this colors the positions from 0 to 7. This is wrong, okay? This is not, of course, what you have to do in the homework. In the homework, the color has to be associated with not with the position on the board, but with the number in the cell, right? But I'm giving this to you so that you see how to give colors, right? And then you have to put in the right condition, okay? But so that is the condition for something to be red. And for something to be black, the condition is that 4 times I plus j is equal to 15, and that colors black the last position. And again, your condition for black would likely be black if, you know, the content of my board at that position is going to be 0, right? Because 0 is the empty cell, right? So you have to write that instead. But this gives you the idea of how to associate classes with elements, okay? Now, the only other thing we have to do in this example, which is, interesting, is this. We want to make sure that when we touch a square, the square moves if it's adjacent to the black position, you know, to the empty position, right? Now, I don't write the particular piece of code, but I wrote for you the interesting piece. That is, how do we capture the fact that the user is clicking on a particular square? Okay, what we would like to do is capture the event of clicking on a particular square and call a function with a square ID in some way, with the square coordinates, right? Something like that. And that's exactly what I do in Vue.js. It's very easy to do. One of the reasons I like Vue.js, you see, there is this v on click, which is a listener, right? And in Android, essentially, and also in the example of this button at the bottom, you know, when I click reset, these things that I call are just names of functions, but the functions don't have any arguments. So, you know, when you click reset, do reset. That's what we were doing also in Android, right? When you click enter, you know, call the click enter method that will do some stuff, right? But in Vue, it's a little bit more flexible because we can actually give parameters to this function. So what I'm saying is this. When you click on these elements, call the method shuffle with parameters ij, where the ij's are these parameters by Vue. You see, you cannot use any parameters. You cannot use now k, where k is, you know, some random JavaScript variable that you define somewhere else. Vue has to know about these parameter values. And it knows about the parameter values in one of two ways. Either they are declared in, for instance, some loop there in the layout, as is the case over here, or else they are data that is defined in the Vue as VData, no? So for example, I could add here the parameter board if I wanted, okay? I mean, it would be not necessary because I can access the parameter board from within the function if I want. But all I want to say is that board is known because it's declared as one of the data of VU. And so are I and j because they're declared as loop indices here. You know, if I had another variable here, I don't know if I have another variable like var enumerate, whatever, no? This is also a variable. But I don't think I can put it here. I'm quite sure. Okay? Okay, maybe I'm wrong. Oops, I deleted something useful, I guess. Okay. Okay? So, when I call shuffle ij, what I do is this. I need to define a method that is called shuffle. And so I say method shuffle is equal to self-shuffle. And you say, where do the arguments go? Well, the arguments, who cares? I mean, shuffle is a function. This is JavaScript. It's a language for adults. You know, you have functions that can be self-standing objects. You don't need to, I mean, self-standing entities. You don't need to wrap them into objects like in Java. And so, shuffle is a function. And yes, when you call it, you might want to give it a list of parameters, right? But just when you call it, if you just want to define it or pass it around, you don't need the arguments. So shuffle is, I define it to be equal to self-shuffle, and self-shuffle is defined above, and right now I do basically nothing. I just log on the console the coordinates at which I click, right? Just to check that it works. So if I use this code, how do I use this code? Well, if I start from scratch, what I do is that I say Cordova run browser, okay? This will run it in the browser. You don't need to do this project on the phone. It's much easier for you to do it in the browser. No, I mean, you learn the same for this project. And then you can say, for example, so my code is a little bit bad, okay? You need to assign class white to the other elements because otherwise they become yellowish because there is this default behavior of tables, okay? So, you know, where I defined, I show you just where. But here I defined when to assign class red and black. But I think you need a case also for white, so that, you know, the elements that you want to be white are really white and stay white and don't yellow when you click on the row, okay? That's just because stupid.css contains some default for how tables look like that paints in a light yellow the row where you click, which if you have, you know, something like a big spreadsheet is useful because it helps you keep the, you know, track horizontally of a data item. But in our case, of course, it's not. So at any rate, I run these, and then I click anywhere and I say inspect, okay? And this gives me access to many things. I don't know if I can enlarge these. Yeah. So, you know, these are the elements. So this is essentially the tree. In this case, it's not so particularly crazily interesting, but the console is interesting. The console is the place in which if you do some mistake in Vue.js, the mistake will be explained to you and you can hopefully fix it, okay? And also if I now click, you see that my log statements appear. And of course nothing moves because I have not implemented any movement, okay? But to implement the movement, you know, once you define the color classes and some things that are related to the cell content, what you have to do is essentially swap the cell content between two cells, right? If one contains a 0, for example here, if one contains a 0 and the other 12, when I click here, I would have to swap the content so that the 12 and the 0 are swapped, right? This becomes 12 and this becomes 0. That's what you have to do for handling the click, no? You look at your neighbors. You have to be careful, you know, not to look out of the array, obviously. But you look at your neighbors, and if one of your neighbors is 0, then you swap the cell content with 0. Okay? With your neighbor. That's what you do. And you don't need to take care of the color. Because if you define the colors right, you define that the cell that contains 0 is always colored black. And so it will sort of automatically work. No? You don't need to take care of the colors. You need to essentially define a predicate that says when the cell content is 0. Haha, that's easy to do. Then you have to define another predicate that you can call that tells you whether the cell content is even. Okay, and depending on whether it's even or, even and non-zero and odd and non-zero. And you use that to assign the red and white classes. I don't know if I need to go into these details. I think they're probably within, but yeah. So that's what one does. I'm just underlining these because I think it's interesting how there is a sort of division of labor between CSS that takes care of the layout, you are gonna take care of the content of the cells, and Vue.js, which is gonna take care of re-rendering the whole thing when the content of the array changes. Okay, so it's actually kind of nice. If I asked you to implement this in Android, it would be a lot more code because you would not be able to rely on CSS on Vue to pick up the slack and handle the colors automatically, etc. Okay. So are there any questions on this homework? I don't think it's very hard, except for computing a random permutation and computing the parity of the permutation. It was kind of fun because so if you look at 15 puzzle solvability, okay, you go to this beautiful page, and Mark Ryan used to be one of my professional colleagues and friends long time ago. So it was really kind of fun to see that it was him who put up this homework solution. And so he gives you in detail, what he even gives you the various proofs of why the parity is invariant when you make a move, and so why you need to compute the parity. You can read these, and it's really kind of fun. I think I read these for the first time a really long time ago on a number of Scientific American when I was, way back in the past. I'm not quite sure, okay, I wouldn't be able to bet it, but I think there was also an article by Martin Gardner, this computer scientist / game a mathematical puzzle expert who wrote a nice short paper about it that I read a long time ago. And so I know about the 15 puzzle solvability. Okay, any question about the homework? Everybody's happy? Maybe everybody's not happy. Okay. The grading of homework 4, on the other hand, will start, I hope I set it by tomorrow. The reason I set it tomorrow and not today is that I want to change the list of sites that are sent to you. Essentially, I don't want to send you complicated newspapers. That makes grading harder. I want to send you some predefined newspapers that contain, a couple of links within the newspaper and a couple of links that are very obviously outside of the newspaper. So that, the debugging does not, the grading does not have to do with guessing, whether this crazy newspaper gave you a mobile URL versus a non-mobile one, etc., etc. It should be much more deterministic how your code behaves, no funny JavaScript around. And so I want to give you this much more controlled environment in which to do the grading. But then I need to finish writing a little bit of server code that produces automatically these, fake news sites. I'm halfway through it, but I need 1 hour more or so. Something like that. So today I will do that, and tomorrow you can start grading homework 4. Okay? There will be either 7 or 8 homework assignments in total, by the way. The reason why I'm uncertain is that I need to decide whether to give 7 and 8 as normal-sized homeworks, or whether just to give homework 7 as a sort of double-sized one. that tests, more complexity into a single assignment. So I need to do some thinking about what exactly to give you yet. Okay, any questions so far? I get too few questions, I get bored. Come on, somebody asks me a question. Nobody. Now, what time is it? No. Sorry? What? This is, homework. Oh, when is it due? On Monday. Yeah.
What did it do?
Sorry?
Did you think I asked what it does? Not like what it does.
Yeah, what does it do? And I say, well, it lets you play the game of 15, yeah. Yeah. Okay. So you can find all the starter code in the Homework 5 branch of the Cordova starter app that I'm giving you. Okay? So it's already up there. Okay. Sorry? A big pardon?
I'll have to install Cordova then.
Yeah, you have to install Cordova. Yeah. I hope it's not too painful, but wait. There was one thing that was truly painful. And it would be good if someone of you tries to install Cordova. The thing that was truly painful was this. When I did the install the first time, before this class, this tells you how much fun is to teach this class. There is always something that blows up at some point. Luckily, I catch most of them before I come in class. But, so when I installed the Cordova before the class started, everything worked and was very smooth. Because one of the things you have to do when you install Cordova, you will see, is that you have to give it a pointer to your installation of the Android SDK. This Android SDK is sitting somewhere on your computer. It depends on where you installed it, but you can figure it out, okay? You can find it. But for example, on my laptop, it is I have a directory, I put it there, okay? But I have in my work directory, in which I keep all my various projects, there is this Android SDK Mac OS X. And if you are under Windows, it will have another name, okay? And inside here, there is whatever. And Android Studio knows about that directory. So when I haven't checked, but in Android Studio, there must be some way of configuring where that directory is. I know because I did it some time ago in the long ago past, okay? So if I switch on Android Studio, at some point, I don't know, like I can open anything, I guess. But there is, maybe somebody knows by heart, but I think it's under Tools, Android SDK Manager, okay? And if I go here, there must be some place, Android SDK location, that tells me where the SDK is, okay? So essentially, Cordova needs to know where the classical Android SDK is. And it has also some other installation requirements, Apache Cordova. So this is maybe the only gotcha really of the homework. There are two gotchas. You may not be able to implement correctly the parity check of the permutation. Okay, big deal, you lose a few points, okay? It's not so great, but it's still kind of okay. But the real gotcha is that you are not able to install Apache Cordova at the last moment. So this is something that you need to try today, if possible. The problem is that it depends on Node. Node.js is a server framework written in JavaScript that runs on your laptop. Why this craziness? Because when you run Cordova in your browser, what you're doing is serving web pages from your laptop, okay? And the Cordova code base is using the Node.js server in order to serve those web pages out of your laptop. You don't need to know Node, you don't need to know how it works, you don't need to know anything about it, you just need to get it installed on the laptop and get it to work, okay? But that, you can always get bitten by some sort of strange craziness of the last minute, okay? to me, the installation of these, because I installed it cleanly, I had a really, 1-year-old version of Cordova. In the meantime, they released a more stable one, so I essentially cleaned up, I deleted my old version of Cordova, I restarted cleanly, and I had an easy time installing it, following exactly the instructions that are on the Cordova web page. Then one thing happened. The thing that happened is that this thing here threw me from the SDK. I don't remember what I had. I think I had a 6.0 or 7, and it threw me to 7.1.1. When you do this directory of the Android SDK changes. And there was a piece that was missing that I had to copy from an old obscure place. Maybe, I don't know, can you search, because I've written it somewhere with the intention of eventually telling you. I should have told you earlier, I guess. But I essentially had to crazily look up for this information online until I found some people that reported that if you unzip the SDK, the old SDK, and copy a subdirectory that is called, let's see if I can find the directory. I had to copy Android SDK. Yeah, no, it's too complicated. I'm not going to find it. Yeah, I don't know. There is one of these many pieces that was missing. Sorry? Yeah, I think it's inside build tools, but I don't know exactly what was missing. Whether it was lib or whether it was something else that I had to unzip from somewhere else and copy there. No, I don't think it was in build tools. It was in another place. Anyway, so I don't know where it is. I'll have to search. I think I saved that message and that link somewhere. I mean, it's possible that Cordova has fixed the problem, right? Because essentially what happens is that Cordova and Android are managed by different companies, right? Android by Google, and Cordova is a Mozilla project. So they are not, evolving in sync. So what happens is that they do a new release of Android, and then the Cordova people say, hey, let's test whether Cordova still works or what we have to do in order to make it work, and they change the installer. So it might be that they have already fixed it by now. I ran into this problem, I think, 3 weeks ago, okay, and then I had to fix it. So that is a single, difficult point. Use Piazza, ask me, post if you have any trouble installing Cordova, okay? So you have to install Cordova, and you have to follow the instructions to create the browser platform. You can also create the Android platform. Actually, if you create only the browser platform, I go back on what I said. If you just use the browser platform for this homework, you can do the homework just fine. Because, the glitch is only if you want to use Android as a target. So if you don't use, if you don't say Cordova platform add Android, and if you don't try to actually use Android, then you never get into trouble. So you should be able to do the homework easily from that point of view.
For those of us who haven't really worked with JavaScript before, do you have a good tutorial that you'd recommend to prepare us with homework?
So
like Google it.
Yeah, so I put up some slides on JavaScript, okay? But otherwise, I'm afraid no, because I didn't learn using any tutorial. Okay. I learned it like a crazy cowboy, essentially saying, hey, I need to do this. So, for example, one of the things I don't know on the fly is how do I compute a random permutation of an array? And so, well, you can search for somebody who has a code snippet, or else the minimum you need is a function that gives you a random integer. And if you don't have even that, a random floating point. But if you have that, you can easily permute an array, right? You can figure out the algorithm. And so, you know, I build it in this way, right? So how do you, I mean, I don't know, I don't want to give out the code, but it's not that difficult, you know. I mean, you know how to do for loops, etc. And yeah, it's like there is some value in realizing that you can learn programming languages without being taught, but you're playing the cowboy. I did it often, you know. When I was visiting Google for 3 years, I essentially had to pretend at the beginning that of course I knew C++. In truth, it was 15 years that I hadn't written a single line of C, and I had no clue what C++ was. But you know, I sort of pretended I knew it, and you know, you pick it up. It's like when you go to a foreign country, you know, you have to speak the language. And you keep the accent, as you see, no? And so you continue to write, JavaScript as if you're writing Java or Python, you know, and so it doesn't look quite right for a long while. But after a while, you know, you get the idioms of the language and you go on a little bit better. Yeah. I mean, I'll give you other examples of code, but yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah. Okay.
Just a quick announcement. So today I might go over in the MSI section. I might go over the installation of Cordova. If you guys have any trouble. I don't know about Windows because I haven't tried to install from Windows, but feel free to show up.
Okay, yeah, let me know how the installation goes, because I think it's really sort of the critical problem. Okay, let me go back to the other thing I wanted to do. So, oh, by the way, I haven't shown you, but here, while developing the homework, the way I developed the CSS is by writing, in Compass, this sort of advanced CSS, you know, that is then translated into plain CSS. So you see that I can use scoping as say the table has a width of 100%. This is what makes the table, you know, fill horizontally the screen. And then I said that within table, if there is a TD element within table, the padding is 10 pixels, so that, you know, I put a bit around the number, and the border is 2 pixels solid black. This is, you know, the border of each square. And, you know, the table per se, actually not the table, but the chessboard, which is the div that contains everything. I should have called it 15 board, I don't know, okay? But it has a margin of 20 pixels so that it does not quite hit the edge of the screen. And it's 3 pixels solid black, okay? So I can write in sort of this nice language. You know, red and black and white I don't have to define because I define by stupid.css. So, but I can define things in this nice language. And then, because I'm running Compass is automatically compiling it every time I change it into this myapp.css. Okay? You can do what you want. If you want to become sophisticated, you learn how to run Compass. If you don't want to be sophisticated, you can wing it by editing myapp.css manually yourself. Okay? For the homework, you can do whatever you want. But at least I wanted to show you that, people who and it's not even everybody, right? But I think that sophisticated people that write CSS nicely use tools in order to produce the CSS, because CSS is otherwise such a low-level language. Okay? Okay, now let's go back to the other application. I wanted to be able to read these newspaper websites, and so let me stop these. Git branch, okay, I'm in homework 2. I can do git k and visualize the state of the branches, okay? And so lecture 2 was at the end of these, of the previous class. And so I can do git checkout lecture 2, okay. Oh, okay, sorry, git commit am last changes. I'm not sure what I changed. But okay, now I go back to lecture 2, git checkout branch lecture 3, so that I now have a branch brand new for today's work. Great. And so this goes back to my list of newspapers. Just to refresh our minds, let's see what this does. So I can say Cordova run browser, and this does this. There is a list of newspapers, and I implemented a very primitive refresh button. So what I want to do is slowly transform this into homework 5. Just to show you how it is done and to teach you a couple of techniques around that. Homework 4, sorry. Okay, so since I don't remember what I gave for homework 4, let me look at it as well. I have to search for my own website. Yes, I know, I'm sloppy. Homework 4, this will contain the various URLs that I need, okay? So let me look at the code with you again a moment. And the code does the following, okay? So I have a refresh. It displays every object P in papers is displayed with a title and a subtitle, okay? And it does not do anything when I click it yet. That I'll do it in a second. But the first thing I want to do is that I want to refresh this list of newspapers by doing an HTTP call to the server, rather than by doing it at random. So I'm now doing what you essentially do via the volley get request, no? And I need to do it in this function, okay? Because instead of getting the list in this way, I need to get it into another way. And of course I forget exactly the way. Well, it's not quite true, I kind of remember, okay? But so I'm gonna use jQuery to get the list. jQuery contains many Ajax helpers that are helpers to make HTTP requests that are very handy to use. Okay, and it's almost a universal practice, and this is why I feel funny if I don't have the library jQuery loaded. So it's almost universal practice to rely on jQuery for doing Ajax requests. It's simply much more pleasant. Okay, so there are various ways of various things that you can do after. You can put after the dollar sign. The dollar sign is a sign of the nickname of jQuery library. Okay, and after these, the main methods are get if you want to do a get, post if you want to do a post. Okay, Ajax if you want to do either get or post, but you have a lot more freedom to define a lot of parameters. Okay. And you can also put simply, which is what I will do here, is get JSON. Get JSON is a sort of simplified thing. You know that in the volley you could ask for a JSON resource, right? And it would do some of the decoding for you already, right? Well, this is the same. It's simply a shorthand, but it will deal with the JSON that comes from the server automatically in a slightly nicer way. Okay, so I do get JSON of. And now, in order not to give you mysteries, I want to show you where the documentation for this is. So if you do jQuery get JSON, for instance, okay, you see that in the documentation of the jQuery library, you have a section on Ajax methods, okay, and there is a series of shorthand methods. You normally use a shorthand method unless you want to do something more complicated, in which case you use a general method. But getJSON is one of them, and then there are also others that are, I don't know if they are below or in other, no, they are in other, oh boy. You know, I'm never able to navigate this library well. Okay, there is jQuery get JSON, get script, post, and load. And then there is the Ajax method. So if you want to know how get JSON works, you can also read the documentation. But essentially it has 3 parameters. There is the URL you are calling, the data you are sending with your GET. In this case, we don't need to send any data, but the equivalent of the dictionary of, variable name, variable content, we could give it here, okay? And you can look at examples below. And then there is a function to be called when the call succeeds. Let me show you just an example of a call, okay? Okay, this is too simple. I wanted a more complete example. Okay. Okay, you see? This is a get.json example that is slightly more interesting. There is a URL that has been defined, as a variable somewhere else, I guess. Okay, then there is data. You see what you had to do in Java by calling these URL encoders on these values so that they become URL friendly and yada yada, no? All that. Well, that's done automatically. What you give here is a dictionary of a variable name, comma, value, and you don't worry about anything else. Just the values have to be strings, okay? Otherwise, boo, I don't know what happens to those. I never tried. I usually handle the conversion myself if I need, okay? So you essentially send up this dictionary, and then when the things comes back, you can specify the function of the data that comes back, and data is already an object, a JSON object that is decoded. This is why I give always back, I told you many times, right? I always give back from the cloud to the server a dictionary in Python, right? I made this point that I'm crazy that I always give a dictionary if I only want to return a list, as in this case. And this is because, essentially, it makes my life a little bit more pleasant when I use get.json, because I know that a Python dictionary is translated into a JSON object, and so my argument will be a JSON object ready for use and very easy to use. So, to make a very long story short, how do I do this in my code? Well, I look at the specifications, okay? This is my URL, okay? So I copy the URL and I say get JSON of. Now, sometimes, to be very nice, let me be very nice, in fact, okay? Okay? Var news API is equal to this, okay? So that, in computer science, you make code nicer by introducing one more level of indirection. It's always true, no? So instead of putting a constant, you put a variable that is defined to be equal to that constant, and, everybody's happier. I was driven insane sometimes by people doing this, They're saying, look, you wrote 2 there. Yes. Well, you should define a constant that is equal to 2. What? True story. I got these comments. I won't say by whom, but I really got them. Okay, so news API. Then I have to define the data. Oh boy, I don't have any data to send. I hope this is okay. I'm not sure that whether I have to put it or not. I kind of forget these details. Okay. Let me put a semicolon so it stays happy. And then I need to specify a function that is called when the thing comes back. Okay? And I do it. And so this is my call. Okay? Now what I have to do is, this I don't need it anymore. And this somehow has to happen now inside this function. So what is the idea about this function, about this callback function? By now, you know it in Android, okay? But JavaScript is a little bit like the UI thread in Android. You can never keep JavaScript waiting, okay? JavaScript never waits. So when you wanted to do something that takes time, such as a server request, what you do is this. You tell it, start this request, and once the result comes back, call this function. And JavaScript will not wait. It will do the request, then it will take care of other stuff if it has other stuff to take care of. Once the response is obtained, it will run your callback function, okay? So what perplexes many people, and sorry if I explain it so slowly, okay, but what perplexes some students is this. This code here is really in proximity of this code there, right? I mean, they're very close. They're like one or two lines apart. But they're close in space, but not in time. Because the time inside that function data is very different from the time outside of it. Okay, the execution inside may be delayed by even seconds, depending on how fast the call comes back. Okay, so don't be confused. There are two very different times. The time at which you do the $get and the time at which you do the callback function. Okay, it's sort of important to keep it straight. But so if we keep it straight, now we have this data, which is this decoded object, and let me look at the shape. So the shape is that it has a news site, which is a list of stuff, and that's what I need. Haha, great. So I simply say that self-view papers is equal to data.news sites, because this come back already decoded to me. And so I'm very happy. Okay? And this should even work. So, I mean, just look at it. I mean, isn't it great compared to all the volley junk that we used to write? I think it's great. So, let's see whether it actually works. Okay. Okay. Now I refresh, and it crashes. And it does crash. Hey, what am I doing? So this is good. I wanted to insert a bug manually, but instead I managed to insert one naturally. So what can possibly go wrong? Many things, right? I could be calling the wrong URL. My server could be down. So how do I figure it out? Well, the first thing I do is that I inspect the console. Oh, okay, and I found a beautiful error.